तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो नः प्रचोदयात्। ओम शांति शांति शांति। Namaskar, my dear friends. I am starting the videos on Upanishads. Upanishads, they are the main part of Advaita Vedanta. Two other parts are Brahma Sutra and Bhagavad Gita. Upanishads, they are the part of Vedas. Upanishads, they are the spiritual part of Vedas. Vedas are the oldest book in the whole world. Rig Veda is the oldest book on this planet Earth. So I start this video with the introductory part of Vedas and thereby Upanishads. The Vedas are the basic scriptures of the Hindus and their highest authority in all matters pertaining to religion and philosophy. They are moreover the earliest extant Indo-Aryan literary monuments. The Hindus regard them as eternal, without beginning, without human authorship. The primary meaning of the name Veda is knowledge, supersensuous wisdom. The secondary reference is to the words in which that knowledge is embodied, and so the term Veda denotes not only the orthodox religious and philosophical wisdom of India, but also the books in which the earliest utterances of that wisdom are preserved. The Hindus look upon these books with the highest reverence. They are known as the word Brahma, the Shabda Brahma. Knowledge is of two kinds. The first is derived from the sense organs and corroborated by various evidences based upon the experiences of the sense organs. This is the form of knowledge that falls within the scope of the physical sciences. The second, however, is transcendent and is realized through the mental and spiritual discipline of yoga. This is the subject matter of the Vedas. According to Patanjali, the traditional master of the yoga doctrine, it is not the words of the Vedas that are eternal, but the knowledge or ideas conveyed through them. This knowledge, also called the Saphota, has existed always. At the conclusion of a cycle, both the Saphota and created universe merge in the undifferentiated causal state, and is at the beginning of the new cycle the two together again become manifest. The Lord brings forth the universe with the help of the knowledge of the Vedas. He himself utters the words that express this knowledge and confers upon them their appropriate meanings. That is to say, it is the Lord, the creator of the universe, who has determined the precise meaning that is to be attached to every Vedic word. He is the first teacher of Vedic truth. Though the words may be different in different cycles, the ideas conveyed through them remain unalterable. No human intellect can interfere with them. According to Vedanta, the words of the Vedas come from the Lord spontaneously like a man's breathing. The Mundaka Upanishad commences with the statement that in the beginning of the cycle, the Lord taught the Vedas through Brahma, the first created being. According to the Puranas, Brahma had been absorbed in meditation on the Supreme Lord when, through the Lord's grace, there arose in his heart an indistinct sound. This was followed by the sound Om, the sound Brahma, which is the essence of the Vedic wisdom. Then this sacred syllable transformed itself into the various vowels and consonants of the alphabet. With their assistance, Brahma uttered words, and these are what became known to the world as the Vedas. He taught the Vedas to his disciples Marichi, Atri, Angira, and others, and thus mankind came to possess the Vedic revelations. The Vedas are called Sruti from Sru to hear, since they were handed down orally from teacher to disciple. The Hindus did not at first commit them to writing. Either writing was unknown to them at that early period of history, or they considered the words of the Vedas too sacred to set down. Written words become the common property of all, whereas the Vedas were to be studied only by those who had been initiated by a qualified teacher. Such was the high esteem in which the Hindus held the words that they did not make the slightest change even in the pronunciation while passing them on from generation to generation. Hence, though committed to writing only many centuries after their composition, the Vedas as we now possess them contain the exact words and ideas that were known to the most ancient Hindus. The divisions of the Vedas. The Vedas have been divided in various ways. The two most general divisions according to subject matter are known as the Karma Kanda and Jnana Kanda. The first deals with karma, ritualistic action, sacrifices, etc., the purpose of which is the attainment of material prosperity here on earth and felicity in heaven after death. The second is concerned with the knowledge through which one is liberated from ignorance and enabled to realize the highest good. In the Puranas, it is stated that Vyasa was commanded by Brahma to make a compilation of the Vedas. Vyasa is reputed to be the author of the Mahabharata, of which the Bhagavad Gita forms a part. He lived at the time of the Battle of Kurukshetra. The authorship of several Hindu scriptures is ascribed to Vyasa. Either there was more than one Vyasa or other Indian writers following a well-known custom by means of which importance was often given to books in ancient times, published or circulated their own works under the name of this great philosopher. With the help of four disciples, so the tradition goes, this great saint and poet arranged the Vedas in four books, namely the Rig, Yajur, Saman, and Atharva. He was thus the classifier of the Vedas, though not their author. For many centuries before his time, the Vedas had been known and their injunctions had formed the basis of all Hindu philosophic thought and all Brahmanical ceremonial. But the text had not existed in a systematic form. They had been revealed by the Lord to certain holy men of the remote past who had purified their minds by the practice of such spiritual disciplines as self-control and concentration, the great teachers known as the rishis or seers of truth. The Vedas name both men and women among the rishis. Vyasa compiled the Rig Veda by collecting the rigs out of the Samans by composed the Sama Veda, while the Yajur Veda he composed of Yajus. The Rig Veda, which may be called a book of chants, is set to certain fixed melodies. The Sama Veda has no independent value, for it consists mostly of stanzas from the Rig Veda. The arrangement of its verses is solely with reference to their place and use in the Soma sacrifice. The Yajur Veda contains, in addition to verses taken from the Rig Veda, many original prose formulas which may be called sacrificial prayers. The Atharva Veda consists of a special class of Vedic text known as Chandas. These deals with spells, incantations, and kingly duties as well as exalted spiritual truths. Western scholars sometimes exclude this compilation from their consideration of the Vedas, but according to the Hindu view, it definitely belongs among them. The name Tri or Triad, often used to denote the Vedas, is collectively applied to the Rig Veda, the Sama Veda, and the Yajur Veda. The Atharvaveda being excluded from the triad because it has no application to sacrificial actions. Nevertheless, one of the four priests officiating in all Vedic sacrifices had to be thoroughly versed in the Chandas. Each of the four Vedas falls into two sections, Mantra and Brahmana. The mantra is also called the Samhita, from Sam together and Hita put, which means literally a collection of hymns or mantras used in the sacrifices, the offering of oblations for the propitiation of the devatas or deities is termed the sacrifice or yajna. This was a highly important ceremony through which the ancient Indo-Aryans communed with the gods or higher powers. The mantra comprises prayers and hymns, while the Brahmana contains the rules and regulations for the sacrifices, deals with their accessories, and also reveals meaning of the mantra which otherwise would remain obscure. Therefore, both the mantra and the Brahmana were indispensable for the orthodox worship and propitiation of the gods. A further development of the Brahmana and included therein was the Arnayaka, the so-called forest treaties. This was intended for those people who had retired into the forest in accordance with the ideal of third stage of life and were consequently unable to perform in the usual way the sacrifices obligatory for all twice born householders. The sacrifices required many articles and accessories impossible to procure in the forest. Hence, the Arnayaka prescribes symbolic worship and describes various meditations that were to be used as substitutes for an actual sacrifice. To give an illustration from the first chapter of the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, instead of actually performing the Vedic horse sacrifice, Aswamedha, the forest dweller, was to meditate in a special way upon the dawn as the head of the horse, the sun as the eye, the air as the life, and so on. The worship was lifted from the physical to the mental level. The four stages. The full life period of an Indo-Aryan was divided into four stages, namely Brahmacharya, Grihastha, Vanaprastha, and Sannyasa. The first stage was devoted to study. The celibate student led a life of chastity and austerity and served his teacher with humility. He learnt the mantra and the Brahmana sections of the Vedas, and when he left the teacher's house after completing his studies, he was commanded not to deviate from truth and not to forget to persevere in the study of the Vedas. The second stage was devoted to household duties. The young man took a wife. Both together performed the Vedic sacrifice with the hymns of the mantra and in accordance with the rules laid down in the Brahmana. The third stage commenced when the hair turned grey and the face began to wrinkle. The householder consigned the responsibility of the home to his children and retired with wife into the forest. He was then known as a Vanaprastha or Arnayaka, a forest dweller. The Arnayaka portion of the Vedas prescribed for him sacrifice by meditation and symbolic worship. The final stage, called sannyasa, was the culmination of the strictly regulated life of an Indo-Aryan. During this period, having totally renounced the world, he became a sannyasi or a wandering monk, free from worldly desires and attachments and absorbed in the uninterrupted contemplation of Brahma. It was no longer necessary to worship God by means of material articles or even mental symbols. One experienced directly the non-duality of God, the soul, and the universe, spirit communing immediately with the spirit. The sannyasin took the vow of dedicated his life to truth and to the service of humanity and was honored as a spiritual leader of society. And it was for him Arnayaka were intended. And it was for him that the Upanishads, which are mostly the concluding portion of the Arnayakas, were intended. The Upanishads are concerned with the direct experience of Brahma, which liberates one from the bondage of the relative world. The members of the three upper castes in Hindu society, the Brahmins, the Kshatriyas, and Vaishyas, were called Dvija, twice born. Their first birth refers to their coming out of their mother's womb. The second, which is a spiritual birth, to their initiation by a religious teacher who invests them with the sacred thread, thus entitling them to study the Vedas and participate in the Vedic rituals. Thus the Indo-Aryan seers arranged the Vedas to conform to the four stages of life. The brahmachari studied the Samhita, the householder followed the injunctions of the Brahmana, the forest dweller practiced contemplation according to the Arneka, and the sannyasi, which was guided by the exalted wisdom of the Upanishads. According to the Hindu view, all four portions of the four Vedas were revealed simultaneously and have existed from the very beginning of the cycle. They are not to be regarded as exhibiting a philosophical development or evolution in the processes of thought. According to a Vedic injunction, one can renounce the world whenever one feels distaste for it. Thus, one can become a sannyasi from any stage. The normal course, however, is to proceed through the series of the four stages. Some Western scholars divide the Vedic age into four distinct periods. These are named the Chandas period, the Mantra period, the Brahmana period, and the Sutra period. According to this view, the mantra or hymns were composed during the Chandas period and compiled during the Mantra period. During the first part of the Brahmana period were composed the Brahmanas, and during the second part the Arnekas and the Upanishads. During the Sutra period were written the well-known sutras, namely the Kalpa, Graha, Srota, and others. Then a decline began. There is some plausibility in this division into periods. Hindu scholars, however, challenge the categorical conclusion of Western scholars who claim that no Vedic literature but the Samhita and Brahmana existed before the Upanishads. The Brihadaranyaka Upanishad states as from a fire kindled with wet fragments, diverse kinds of smoke issue. Even so, my dear, the Rig Veda, Yajur Veda, Sam Veda, Athar Veda, history, mythology, arts, Upanishads, verses, aphorisms, sutras, elucidations, and explanations are like the breath of this infinite reality. In the Chandogya Upanishad, Narada gives an account of various subjects studied by him prior to his coming to Sanak Kumara. They include, beside the Vedic text, history, mythology, the lore of portents, logic, ethics, and the various other sciences. Similar instances can be given from the Taittiriya, Arnayaka, and other scriptures. All this shows that the Vedic literature was extremely various even before the compilation of the Upanishads. It may be admitted, however, that during the four periods recognized by the Western scholars, the various designated portion of the Vedic literature came in sequence to the fore. It has already been stated that Vyasa systemized the Vedas in four books. He taught the Rig Veda to his disciple Pala, the Yajur Veda to Vasampayana, the Sam Veda to Jaimini, and the Athar Veda to Sumanta. Among the disciples of Vasampayana was the celebrated Yajna Valkya, one of the great teachers of the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. A legend states that this disciple became so vain of his knowledge that he incurred the displeasure of his guru and was expelled from the hermitage with the command that he should leave what he knew of the Veda behind. The proud disciple spat out everything that he had learnt and went away. But some other disciples of the sage Vasampayana were grieved at the sad plight of the Vedic lore, and so, assuming the forms of patriarchs, Titiriya, they swallowed it and later on taught that Vedic knowledge to their own disciples. Since then, that portion of the Vedas has been known as the Black Yajur Veda, Krishna Yajur Veda, and also as the Taittiriya Samhita from Titra. Yajnavalkya, however, worshipped the sun god, who was so pleased with his devotion that he appeared before him in an equine form. The god committed to him the Vedic knowledge that later on became known as the White Yajurveda, Sukla Yajurveda, or the Vajsneyi Samhita from Vaja, meaning energy, strength. This was the version of the Veda that Yajnavalkya taught to his disciples. The four basic Vedas gradually branched off into many recensions or shakhas at the hands of various teachers after whom they were named. Thus, the Satpatha Brahmana of the White Yajurveda survives in the Kanva and Madhyandina recensions, according to the two disciples of the Yajna Valkya. They differ from each other greatly in content as well as in the number and arrangement of the sections and chapters, the former having 17 and the latter 14 sections. The concluding portion of the last book of both recensions is the Brihadaranyaka Upanishads, but here again the two versions often differ. Shankaracharya based his commentary on the Kanva recensions. Samveda, Atharveda, history, mythology, arts. Each of the Vedas contain its own Brahmanas, which, as already stated, provide instructions regarding the procedures of sacrifice and also through the Arnayakas, meditations and symbolic worship for the forest dwellers. The Atriya and Kausitaki Brahmanas belong, for example, to the Rigveda, the Taittiriya and Maitrayani to the Black Yajurveda, the Satpatha to the White Yajurveda, the Chandogya and the Tandya to the Samveda, and the Gopatha Brahmana to the Atharveda. In most cases, the concluding portion of the Arnayaka is the Upanishad, also called the Vedanta, because in it the Vedic wisdom reaches its culmination, Anta. It shows the seeker the way to liberation and the highest good. Usually there is a full series from the Samhita or mantra through the Brahmana and Arnayaka to the culmination in the Upanishad. For example, the Taittiriya Samhita is followed by the Taittiriya Brahmana, at the end of which comes the Taittiriya Arnayaka. And this is concluded by the Taittiriya Upanishad. But in rare instances, an Upanishad may come directly at the conclusion of the Samhita, as in the case with the Isa Upanishad. The Taittiriya Upanishad form the last three chapters of the Taittiriya Aranyaka. The Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, the last six chapters of the Satpatha Brahmana. The Aitreya Upanishad, the last five chapters of the Aitreya Aranyaka, and the Kena Upanishad, the ninth chapter of the Talvakara Brahmana of the White Yajurveda. The Antiquity of the Vedas. One hesitates to enter into a discussion of the time when the Vedas were collated. The compiler Vyasa is reputed to have been alive at the time of the Battle of Kurukshetra. But when was that battle fought? Some European Indologies assign the Vedas to the 12th century BC, others to earlier ages. Max Muller, for example, supposed the date to be about 1200 BC, but Hogg about 2400. Neither believed, of course, in the divine origin of the hymen. Bal Gangadhar Tilak, an eminent Indian scholar, calculated from astronomical data and suggested that the mantras of the Rig Veda were brought together about 5000 years before the Christian era, while according to the Orthodox tradition, the text even before their compilations had been known to the rishis for unnumbered years. In short, the dates of the Vedic hymens and collections are far from clear. One reason for the obscurity is that the ancient Hindus lacked the historical sense. They seldom kept records of the dates of their literary, religious, or even political achievements. The Vedas, furthermore, which had been handed down orally for so many centuries, were never believed by them to have had human authorship. They had either been taught to the sages by God or had become manifest of themselves to the primordial rishis who were the seers of the mantras. Hence, in India, the tendency has always been to regard the Vedas as eternal rather than as compositions of a certain historical moment. But even from the modern historical point of view, it is not easy to determine the origin and trace the gradual development of Vedic traditions. The Rig Veda, which is generally recognized as the earliest of the four, contains lofty philosophical concepts and sentiments of a monastic caste, such as Western thinkers are inclined to assign to a later and highly developed stage of human thought. The reality is one we read, for example, but the sages call it by various names. Moreover, we find that a critical spirit has already been developed. The ability of the gods, who themselves exist in time and space and are victims of causality to create the universe, is questioned. Such ideas indicate a maturity of philosophical insight, by no means the primitive infancy of thought. Following their historical methods, the European Indologists regard the Upanishads to be of later composition than the Mantras and Brahmanas. They do not admit any of them to be earlier than the 11th century BC, while to many are assigned a much later date. In this respect, the Hindu tradition, as we have seen, in is totally different. The orthodox belief and teaching being that all portions of the Vedas were revealed at the same time, though the various collections might have been compiled in different periods. So I end this video here, and Next video number 2, I will start with introduction to the Upanishads. So thank you for watching this video. Please like, comment and share the video and subscribe the channel. Thanks a lot. Namaskar my dear friends.